Shalom. Once again, all praise is honor and glory unto the Most High. Yahweh Ba'asham, Yahweh Shai Ba'asham Kodash. Double honor to the elders and the apostles of the Great Millstone, and salutations to all you sincere Kim. And this is your brother Abawan, back again with another video through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'asham, Yahweh Shai Ba'asham Kodash. All praises and glory is due, especially in the times that we're in. And this is a video from the Without History channel titled Recent and Old Studies Confirm that the Sumerians were black, or we should use the term so-called black, right? Because really, the Sumerians were black, right? And the title I'm going to entitle this video is that every nation was black except for Esau Edom, or every nation was so-called black except for Esau Edom, right? Because if you go back to the ancient world, right, because you always have these memes from Esau where they say that, oh, black people, right, so-called black people believed that they are everybody, that they were the Vikings, they were the samurais, they were the ancient Chinese, they were the Egyptians, they were the ancient Mesopotamians, they were the Native Americans, and so on and so forth, right? And yeah, man, for the most part, that's pretty accurate because the original Vikings were Jakes, right? The original, you had the original samurais were Jakes as well, right? I think it's what Sakamoto Takanoe, right? The Native Americans are Israelites, okay. Well, the Egyptians were Hamites, but they were still so-called black, but they were Hamites, right? So that's the only one that we as Israelites are not claiming, right? The Sumerians, they weren't Hamites. The Sumerians were Hamites as well. It's a really, the Sumerians are Hamites as well, right? But what we are saying is that except for Esau Edom, right? All the other nations were so-called black, right? And even more than that, all the way, if you go all the way back to one of the first nations, because the Sumerians represent the first civilization. Nobody on this planet had so-called white skin, right? So the way you usually see the current depiction of these Sumerians to be like, or to look like modern day Arabs, is completely inaccurate. So I want to see if I can play a little bit of his video and just play a certain part of it before I start going and getting precepts, right? Let's do that.
In 1977, Egyptian female black. So we see that the Africoid populations, inhabited by hunter-gatherer, tradition explains the back to the and genetics between Sumerian and the Niger-Congo/Bantu superfamily. Dr. Clyde Winters argues that Sumerian is an integral part of the Bafsudralam language family, which includes Niger-Congo, Dravidian, and Elamite. Like Bantu languages, Sumerian is agglutinative, meaning that complex words are formed by stringing together invariable roots and particles. This grammatical
Right, so let me just stop it right there. So the idea is that he's bringing out the scientific evidence to show you that yes, the Sumerians, historically speaking, were in fact a black race of people, right? Right. So let's go and get the precept. So the first precept I want to bring out. Get that. Let's get that. So that should be right here. That should be either Genesis 8 or Genesis, yeah, either Genesis 8 or Genesis 10. Yeah, this is it right here. So this is the book of Genesis 10, and I'll start from verse 8. And Cush, remember that Cush being one of the table of the nations, right, representing the Ethiopians. Now Genesis 10 verse 8. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before Yahweh, where it was said, even Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh, right? If you go into your biblical history. And even he mentioned it in the video that the Bible records, right? The scriptures say that the first nations, your Sumeria, Arcadia, Babel, right? The first initial Babylonian empire were all started by Nimrod, right? So let's keep going into it. Genesis 10, verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar, right? And Babel, of course, represents Babylon, modern day Iran. Ekked, Akkad, and Calneh, these are the Mesopotamian regions, right? So that's because, even Esau will tell you that, oh, the first civilizations were created in Mesopotamia, right? That's your Sumeria, your Arcadia, the Babel, and so on, and so on and so forth. And I believe that Erech should be a city in Sumeria, one of the cities of Sumeria, right? Like Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham came from. If you go into the history, that was one of the cities that were in Sumeria. So let's get this. Erech. Yeah, Erech is one of the cities in Sumeria. So let's get this. Yeah, here it is. Erech Long. Erech from Strong is H751. Erech, which is Iraq, which is actually Iraq. And if you start to actually pronounce it Iraq, there is no E in the Hebrew, right? Iraq, which is Long, a city 40 miles, which is 64 kilometers northwest of Ur towards Babylon on the left bank of the Euphrates River, right? And the I believe the two rivers in the Mesopotamia is the Euphrates and the Tigris. Let me just open up the Chrome and make sure that I'm not mixing that up, right? So the two Mesopotamia. Right, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The two main rivers of Mesopotamia are the Tigris and the Euphrates, located in Southwest Asia, primarily modern day Iraq and Syria. Kind of that's the next nation country I was thinking about. Syria. Yeah, just that's also where the Assyrians come from. These rivers define the Fertile Crescent, providing the necessary silt and water for ancient agriculture, which earned the region the nickname the land between the rivers. And that's basically what Mesopotamia means, the land between the two rivers, right? So your first civilizations were built in this region. Like I was saying, Erech, Calneh, these are all cities that were in that region. Okay, so that should be okay. That should be all I wanted to get from there. So yeah, basically going into the first cities, right? So the Sumerians, of course, represents Shinar, because that's the land of Sumeria, which is Shinar, right? And these are your, like I said, your first cities, and so I get for repeating it, but it has to be mentioned again. Okay, so even the scripture show you that Sumeria and all the other cities that were built around this region this time were one of the first cities that were built, and all these people, okay, were all dark skinned people, right? So now now to jump forward to the book of Genesis, the 25th chapter, right? Genesis, the 25th chapter, where you start to see, your varying skin tones with the birth of Esau Edom. Okay. Right, so the birth of Esau Edom, right? So because all the nations and all the peoples that existed right before Isaac had his children were all dark-skinned people, so-called black people, right? All the nations, all the 14 nations, and they had already been, or I should say, beginning to be established before the birth of Esau Edom, right? So this is the book of Genesis 25, verse 19. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian, or Laban the Syrian. So I want to let's keep going into. Let me not jump, because there's still lots to go. Let me not jump. Right, Genesis 25, verse 21. And Isaac entreated Yahweh for his wife, because she was barren, and Yahweh was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Yahweh. And Yahweh said unto her, Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. and the one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Right. So this is a prophecy going into the birth of the nation of the birth of Esau, the nation of Esau, Edom, and the nation of Israel. So even all the way going back to, or rather, going back to the time of Isaac, right? And in time of Isaac, that you still had nations being born and nations being established. So this is one of the two nations that you see in the table of nations. And before this time, like I said, and even during this time as well, there were no so-called white people on the earth, right? Because Esau is not Japheth, okay? Even Japheth themselves were dark-skinned people. At this time period, you had the Minoans, right? Which are your ancient Japhetic people, okay? The Etruscans was again your ancient Japhetic people, which were also dark-skinned. Because you can even look at some of the pottery that you had, the art during that time, and see how they depicted themselves the same way everybody else on the planet and every other nation depicted themselves as so-called Negroes, so-called dark-skinned people. Let's keep going into it. All right. Now, Genesis 25, verse 24. And when our days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that his brother came out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 70 years old when she bare them. Right, so the first son, right, the elder, came out as the scriptures say, like a hairy, he came out like a hairy garment, red all over like a hairy garment, right? So because that's exactly what Esau looked like when he was born, red, right? Like because he's not white, that's why I say so-called white. He is red because his blood shows through his skin. It's translucent, really. That's why you see majority of these Edomites out there are always looking red as hell, especially when they are under the sunlight, right? That's where you get your tan, so quote unquote tan, and really it's not a tan, it's more of a sunburn, okay? And that sunburn always makes them look even more red than usual, right? So this is the origin of so-called white people on the earth, because now Esau Edom wants to change the identity of every other group that exists on this planet, and make them so-called white rather than their true racial skin tone, right? Or that I should say their true phenotype. And the reason for that is to basically set himself up as, let's get that precept, right? So this is the book of Job 9 verse 24. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covered the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? Right, and this is basically to set him up as the greatest people on the earth. It's a deception, right? A deceptive tactic that Esau is using to set himself up as the greatest people on the earth, right? That's why you see that all the other groups of people, they can, Esau always depict them as, Edomites, right? Well, as soon as you try to make them look like Jake, right, like their actual identity, like they actually did look in the past, like a dark-skinned people, that's when you start getting, racism, it's a race of so on and so forth, right? And that just shows you, how far the deception of Esau Edom has gone. Because it's these devils that are in control of, that's why inside the scripture say that these devils, they have the fatness of the earth, the dew of heaven, right? Because the ones are in control of the historical record, and the ones that are always doing the excavation digs and the archaeology and so on and so forth, right? So they can present all the false information they want to. And since we're dealing with Esau Edom, right, we know that the majority of the information or rather the most of the information that Esau presents is always false, because that's how this devil operates. As the scriptures say, he is the liar. He is a liar and the forger of it. Let's get that precept as well. It's not even that far from Job 9. So this is the book of Job 13 verse 4. But ye are forgers of lies. Ye are all physicians of no value. And that's exactly what Esau Edom is, a forger of lies, and a physician of no value. But now that deception is being done away with, and the world is beginning to see, who, the world is beginning to see who the devil truly is, and who the true Israelites are. That's the so-called Negroes. Latinos, and Native American Indians, right? That's another reason why you see, Esau changing up the faces, hiding the true identity and the true history, right, of this kingdom, of this world, basically, in order to hide, who you have to hide the who the Israelites really are, right? To hide the identity of who the Israelites really are. That's your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians. Because let's remember that one of the first nations that these devils basically covered up were actually the Israelites, right? But that does not change the fact that the other nations as well, even going back to the table of nations, and even going back to the history, were all dark-skinned people, man. They were all dark-skinned people, right? So-called, all looking like so-called Negroes, right? So yeah, as the meme goes, we was kings and shit. Okay, so with that, I'll end the video right there. Once again, all praises, honor, and glory unto the Most High. Yahweh Ba'asham, Yahweh Shai Ba'asham Rakakwadash. Wa abad babal and through the Spirit. I hope you are calm. Andrew Akwat were edified. Shalom.